Guys, today's second part of Did Ancient Gladiators Really Fight to the Death? And with that, let's take a slow step forward. We've explored their daily lives, their strange diet, their celebrity status, and their occasional brushes with death. Next, let's move toward the politics of the games, the way emperors used gladiators as tools of control, and how the whole system eventually started to crumble. By now, we've wandered through the lives of gladiators, their training, their diet, their fan base, and the spectacle of the arena itself. But to really understand why gladiators mattered to Rome, we need to look at the bigger picture, the politics, the power plays, and the strange way in which these bloody spectacles helped hold the empire together. Because, you see, gladiators weren't just entertainers. They were political tools. The Roman elite understood that giving people bread and games, panem et circenses, was a way to keep the population content, feed them, amuse them, dazzle them, and they were less likely to riot. A free ticket to the Colosseum could mean the difference between a restless mob and a cheerful crowd shouting praises to the emperor. The games were expensive. Training gladiators, staging fights, importing exotic animals, constructing elaborate sets. None of this came cheap, but emperors and wealthy politicians considered it money well spent. Sponsoring games was a way to buy popularity. Think of it as a political campaign, except instead of handing out buttons and stickers, you're throwing 100 lions into an arena and letting them chase people. Julius Caesar, long before he became dictator, was famous for staging lavish spectacles to win public favor. Later emperors perfected the art. They'd use the games to celebrate military victories, birthdays, or even just to distract from bad news. Don't worry about the taxes. Look, here's a rhinoceros fighting a gladiator. And the people would cheer, because who doesn't like a bit of free drama on a sunny afternoon? But the politics of the arena went deeper than distraction. The Colosseum itself was a statement of power, built by Vespasian and completed by his son Titus. It was designed to show the might and generosity of the Flavian dynasty. A massive, free entertainment venue in the heart of Rome, capable of seating tens of thousands. It said to the people, "We rule you, but we also take care of you." It was propaganda in stone, reinforced every time the crowds filled the stands. Emperors sometimes sat in the Colosseum, watching the games alongside their subjects. This wasn't just leisure, it was theater. The emperor's presence reminded everyone who controlled life and death, who could spare or condemn, who made the games possible at all. When the losing gladiator looked up and appealed for mercy, it was the emperor, or his representative, who gave the final signal. That tiny gesture of thumb up or thumb down carried enormous symbolic weight. The ruler literally decided who lived and who died, in front of thousands of witnesses. And yet, emperors had to be careful. The crowd's voice mattered too. If an emperor consistently went against public opinion, sparing fighters the people wanted dead or killing ones they adored, resentment could build. The games were a kind of conversation between ruler and ruled, played out with swords and shields. This political dynamic explains why gladiatorial games lasted so long. They weren't just entertainment, they were a mechanism of control. But like all systems, they eventually started to fray. Let's drift slowly into the decline. By the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, Rome was changing. The empire was under pressure. Economically, militarily, spiritually, Christianity was spreading, and with it came new attitudes toward blood sports. Early Christian writers condemned the games as cruel and immoral. Stories circulated of Christians refusing to attend, or even being martyred in arenas themselves, though the historical accuracy of those tales is sometimes debated. At the same time, the costs of staging the games were becoming harder to bear. Maintaining gladiator schools, importing wild animals, and repairing vast amphitheaters wasn't cheap. As the empire struggled with invasions, plagues, and political instability, lavish games seemed less practical. Slowly, the great tradition began to fade. By the time of the late empire, gladiatorial combat was no longer the centerpiece it had once been. The last known official gladiatorial games in Rome were held in the 5th century AD, under the Emperor Honorius. After that, the practice disappeared, swept away by changing values and shrinking resources. The Colosseum itself was eventually repurposed, used as a fortress, a quarry, even a Christian shrine. The roar of the crowd faded into silence. And yet, the image of the gladiator never vanished. Medieval people remembered them, though often through distorted lenses. Renaissance artists romanticized them. Modern filmmakers turned them into global icons. Gladiators, real or imagined, still strut across our mental stage. Symbols of courage, brutality, and spectacle. Think of the movies, the sweeping sand, the clash of swords, the slow-motion fall of the defeated fighter. Hollywood loves the fight to the death image, even though the reality was usually less final. In a way, our modern myths about gladiators mirror the ancient ones. We're not really looking at history. We're looking at the stories we want to tell about strength, honor, and mortality. And maybe that's the most fascinating part. Gladiators lived lives of hardship, often enslaved, often brutalized, and yet they became legends. Their memory outlasted empires. Their struggles, whether staged or real, still echo in our imaginations 2,000 years later. So, did ancient gladiators really fight to the death? Sometimes, but more often, they fought to survive, to entertain, to carve out a space of meaning in a world that treated them as tools of politics and pleasure. Death was always near, but life, unexpectedly, defiantly, was part of the story too. So here we are, at the end of our long wander through the sand and stone of ancient arenas. We've followed gladiators from their first steps into the training schools, through the roar of the Colosseum, all the way to the slow decline of their world. And what's left, after all that dust has settled, is a strangely gentle picture. Not of endless slaughter, but of human beings, ordinary men caught in extraordinary circumstances. Fighters who weren't just disposable bodies, but professional athletes with diets, fan clubs, and even the occasional celebrity endorsement carved in marble. The myths tell us they were always fighting to the death. The reality says otherwise. A fight to the death did happen, but rarely. Gladiators were investments, and the Romans, practical as ever, didn't like throwing away money. The crowd wanted drama, not mass graves, and emperors wanted applause, not empty coffers. Still, death was always part of the bargain. Every match carried the risk. One bad move, one unlucky blow, and that could be the end. It's this tension between survival and destruction that gave the games their power. A balance between life and death played out in front of thousands of eyes. If you think about it, that tension hasn't really gone away. We may not have gladiators anymore, but we still have athletes and performers who push their bodies to extremes, who risk pain, humiliation, or even injury for the sake of spectacle. We still gather in giant arenas. We still cheer, we still chant, we still demand something larger than life from people who, deep down, are just as human as we are. The Colosseum may be a ruin now, its arches cracked, its seats empty, its floor open to the sky, but the echo of those cheers still lingers. Not in the stones themselves, but in the way we tell the story. In movies, in novels, in bedtime rambles like this one. The gladiators keep fighting, not with swords anymore, but in the imagination. And maybe that's the best way to remember them. Not as endless victims, not as cartoonish killers, but as people. People caught in the machinery of empire, trying to survive, sometimes even to thrive, in a world that treated them as expendable. Their lives were short, but their memory turned out to be long. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, picture that ancient arena not as a place of horror, but as a place of stories. Imagine the soft crunch of sand, the murmur of the crowd, the sunlight spilling through the arches. Imagine the fighters stepping forward, calm and steady. Their fates uncertain, their lives strangely precious. And then let it fade. The roar quiets. The crowd disperses. The arena empties out. What's left is silence, soft and steady, wrapping everything in stillness. The gladiators have fought enough for one night. You've listened enough, too. And now, it's time to let your own mind rest. Drift down into the quiet. Let the history dissolve into dreams. Good night, and sleep well.